Puka Nacua is slowly becoming one of the league's brightest young stars in the NFL at the wide receiver position. In his rookie season in 2023, caught 105 passes while also getting 1,486 receiving yards, which also just happens to be the rookie record for receiving yards over a rookie season, while also getting 6 touchdowns. Nacua has really shown off for the LA Rams, and in 2024, during his second season, he has been plagued by injuries early, but is still viewed as a top young weapon. Nacua was ultimately a 5th round pick in 2023, the final pick in the 5th round, all the way at pick 177. Puka Nacua in the 2023 draft class ultimately was the 20th wide receiver taken, and ultimately one has to wonder, who were the receivers taken ahead of him, and are they better than Nacua, obviously through this short amount of time? The first wide receiver drafted in the 2023 NFL draft was ultimately wide receiver out of Ohio State, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Jackson Smith-Njigba, going to the Seattle Seahawks, has been decent so far in his NFL career, but through the 2 years, at least so far, still has yet to reach the same amount of receiving yards that Puka Nacua has over his rookie season, and still hasn't quite gotten to that same level. Ultimately, Seattle is going to be fairly happy with their young receiver, but Nacua likely would be the better option. The next wide receiver taken in the 2023 NFL draft ultimately only came 1 pick later, where the Los Angeles Chargers selected Quentin Johnson, wide receiver out of TCU. Johnson was a highly regarded prospect coming off of one of the teams that went to the national championship, but ultimately has not lived up to his full potential the 2 years into his short NFL career, barely going just under 600 yards over the 2 years so far. Ultimately, Puka Nacua would definitely be viewed as the better option. At pick number 22, 1 pick after Quentin Johnston, the Baltimore Ravens select Zay Flowers out of Boston College. Now, Zay Flowers has been a decent player in the NFL. He is slowly emerging as the Baltimore Ravens' #1 wide receiver for Lamar Jackson in his rookie season, notching 858 receiving yards, and so far in this year having just shy under 7 receiving yards, ultimately looking fairly decent and is growing into a #1 role, but for that immediate payoff, Puka Nacua definitely the better receiver. The final first round wide receiver in the 2023 NFL draft, this time at pick number 23, that's right, 4 wide receivers in a row. The Minnesota Vikings decide to get their true #2, this time getting the guy to go behind Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, ultimately coming out of USC, becoming the 4th wide receiver in his rookie season, having a pretty good year with 911 receiving yards and 10 total receiving touchdowns. And so far in year #2, only playing in 2 games, so has definitely battled some injuries. Not quite as good as Puka Nacua, but from what he's worth to this Minnesota Vikings team, I would say this was a pretty solid pick. With the 39th pick in the draft, the Carolina Panthers decided to go with Ole Miss receiver Jonathan Mingo. Now, Jonathan Mingo has not had a very successful career in the NFL, only lasting 1.5 seasons with the Carolina Panthers before they decided to ultimately trade him to the Dallas Cowboys, where he has yet to play a single game. Jonathan Mingo has still yet to have over 600 receiving yards in his NFL career and is still looking for that first receiving touchdown. Ultimately, Puka Nacua would have been the much better option. At pick number 50, the Green Bay Packers select the first of the 2 wide receivers they would select ahead of Puka Nacua. This time they selected Jalen Reed out of Michigan State, and so far Jalen Reed in his NFL career has been a very solid receiver for the Green Bay Packers, but definitely not to the same level that Puka Nacua has in the NFL. The Kansas City Chiefs, with the 55th pick in the draft, decided to go with wide receiver out of SMU, Rashee Rice, and so far through the early career for Rice, he was truly the #1 receiver for Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs during their Super Bowl run last year. Has had a little bit of a shaky offseason, was poised to have an excellent year before he got injured. Rashee Rice is looking like he could be a top receiver for this team for a lot of years, but ultimately Puka Nacua would have been the better option. Next wide receiver on the list was selected with the final pick in the second round, where the Denver Broncos at pick number 63 selected Marvin Mims Jr. out of Oklahoma, and ultimately he has already proven to be a Pro Bowler in this league as a returner. In terms of the receiving game, he only has 377 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown, and hasn't played a game yet so far this year, but ultimately for the Denver Broncos, Puka Nacua would have been the better option. Now making our way into the third round with the first wide receiver taken at pick number 69, the Houston Texans selected Tank Dell out of Houston to give their young quarterback, who they drafted in CJ Stroud, another young weapon to work with. And Tank Dell, for the most part last year before he got injured, looked like he could have been a really high-end receiver, getting 709 yards, 7 receiving touchdowns, but ultimately a injury took him out for the early stages of that year, and so far in 2024 hasn't been able to get to that same level of form, ultimately having to deal with a handful of injuries also. But if Tank Dell can get back to what we saw as a rookie receiver, he could be very good. But again, Puka Nacua, better option. The New York Football Giants are up next with a wide receiver pick. This time at pick number 73, they take the wideout Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee, and so far through his first 2 seasons in the NFL, he hasn't quite lived up to the billing that he had out of Tennessee, notching just under 400 receiving yards, only having 6 receiving yards so far in 2024. Ultimately, Puka Nacua was the better option. A pick right after the Giants, the Cleveland Browns also decided to select a Tennessee wide receiver, this time selecting Cedric Tillman with pick number 74. Now, Cedric Tillman, similar to Hyatt, has not had the same amount of success that he had in college, having just under 500 receiving yards throughout his entire career, but he does have 3 receiving touchdowns so far in 2024. The Indianapolis Colts, a few picks later, at number 79, they ultimately select Josh Downs, wide receiver out of North Carolina, and through his rookie season, he showed that he could be a decent, dependable wide receiver. Now in 2024, he's looking to improve that, but ultimately still has yet to reach the same amount of receiving yards that Nacua did in his rookie season, but ultimately still a decent player, but not quite to the level of Nacua. At pick number 94, the Arizona Cardinals select Michael Wilson out of Stanford, and through his rookie season actually had a little bit of a decent year, 565 receiving yards, 3 receiving TDs, but so far in 2024 has not played a single game, and ultimately has not been better than Puka Nacua. With the 100 pick in the draft, the Las Vegas Raiders select Trey Tucker out of Cincinnati, and so far Trey Tucker in his rookie season having a pretty decent, but is also having a much better year number 2, getting just shy under 425 receiving yards so far through the 2024 campaign. But ultimately, if the Raiders were looking to get a receiver, they didn't have to look too far and potentially could have gotten the Las Vegas native in Puka Nacua. The Los Angeles Chargers with the second wide receiver drafted, and also out of TCU. This time it is Darius Davis. Ultimately in his rookie year was viewed more as a return specialist and hasn't done quite too many things, having less than 200 receiving yards throughout his entire career thus far. Charlie Jones out of Purdue was selected 131st by the Cincinnati Bengals and really has only been a return specialist in the NFL, not even having 100 yards so far in his second year. At pick 133, the Chicago Bears select Tyler Scott out of Cincinnati. In his rookie season, having a few splash plays, but ultimately in year number 2, failing to find the field in most games, and has been a healthy scratch for the majority of the season. With the 150th pick, the Buffalo Bills select wide receiver Justin Shorter out of Florida, ultimately only playing a handful of games for the Bills in 2023, and the Bills would release him at the end of the preseason in 2024. He has signed with the Las Vegas Raiders practice squad so far in 2024. At pick 159, the Green Bay Packers select out of Virginia Dontavian Wicks, and through his rookie season having a decent little year with 581 receiving yards and 4 TDs. So far through his second season in the NFL, having 21 catches for 247 yards and 4 TDs, he has been a decent player for the Green Bay Packers, but ultimately not to the same level that Nacua has for the Rams. And ultimately, that was the final pick before we get to Puka Nacua. A lot of these guys taken ahead of him. I think most teams, if they would have had the ultimate redo, would likely do it again. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe and comment on the video for future videos that you would like to see from us. But make sure to check out all the other exciting videos that we have. Also, make sure to check out the Football Talk podcast here on the channel as well.